Welcome to the Talking Transformation podcast, presented to you from Cape Town here in the Western Cape, South Africa. The podcast is presented with a view to providing a platform and voice for built environment professionals and interest groups who are working towards transforming the places and spaces here in South Africa. It's dedicated to the individuals and community groups who are supporting both the formal and informal processes that are shaping our cities and our spaces. To everybody, welcome. It's just gone 5:45 here in Cape Town, and we're joined across the country by 40 and more colleagues from across the country who have come to talk about the roadmap to net zero carbon buildings by 2030. It's our series finale. We've been engaged with experts from around different municipalities, different players from the private sector over the last 3 or 4 months. And this is our opportunity of coming together and having a discussion, raising questions, trying to expand the knowledge base and have a conversation about what is it we mean by net zero carbon building, what are the opportunities that are available to us, and what is it we should be thinking about in terms of our future efforts, both within the public as well as the private sector. Just to take you back 2 or 3 months, the early conversations between Sustainable Energy Africa and myself as the Talking Transformation podcast anchor was really about a series of conversations that could expand the knowledge of something I certainly very unfamiliar with. Many of my colleagues in the various cities of Cape Town and Johannesburg and elsewhere in the metropolitan authorities signed up to this idea of contributing towards a net zero built environment by 2050. And what we tried to do was to break that down into a 4-part podcast series. Really, episode 1, looking at the foundations, the aspirations. What is it we're trying to understand? Episode 2, some of the governance and leadership elements, and really asking that question of just how ready are cities to make a significant shift, almost a step change and a systemic change within the built environment to support these ambitions. Episode 3, we pulled in the private sector to talk about the market scale transformation of what it would take, of the opportunities that are arising, and particularly the COVID response and this moment in time that we find ourselves in, and saying, how do we start to use this as a further catalyst for some of our climate change aspirations? And then episode 4, which I found probably the most instructive of all, was looking at this idea of how deep can we go in terms of the program. This shouldn't just be about being about Green Star buildings and the formal sector, but how do we start looking at lower income groups and the informal sector? And as somebody who works within a city environment and understanding the challenges of that, I had my own skepticism about how realistic that was. And listening to the colleagues there in episode 4 really convinced me that there really were excellent opportunities. And in fact, there's almost a critical mass which is starting to overtake our own efforts, and that really there's a lot more opportunities than there are reservations. So a very, very interesting way to conclude the formal series of engagements with our colleagues. Some of the big questions, and again, Tlengiwe and Megan, thank you so much for assisting in putting together the questions that have come in. We fielded a number of questions in the last few months, and as we've built up to this period, and really the big 6 questions, let's call them the big 6 for now, and we'll start to use those as a framing mechanism. Is the country ready for net zero carbon? Are we ready as South Africa with all of our challenges right now, whether it's load shedding on the one hand, dealing with a global pandemic on the other, and the increasing degree of informality? These are some of the challenges that we face. Is it a realistic goal for South Africa? How are we going to get the public and private sector to comply? What do we understand are the opportunities within existing buildings? So if part of it is about the new buildings that we are putting on the ground at the moment and asking for certain things, how do we deal with a retrofit program that supports these things, as well as contributing beyond that to issues of the water, waste, transportation issues? There are some transportation colleagues on the call who'd be interested to get your take on this. What's the role of the different stakeholders? How do we understand that? Are there people that we might have forgotten about that we need to engage with further? And finally, one last but certainly not least, in terms of these big 6 ticket items, if other municipalities beyond the metros who've signed up to commitments are developing roadmaps for net zero carbon, what would you recommend as the experts, as the interested parties on this call to achieve this. So that's our starting point. And that's as far as I'm going to take it in terms of introducing this topic in our conversation today. But before I hand over to the guests more broadly, I'm going to ask Megan to take a step back and just reflect on what did you expect to get out of the series, the 4 episodes that we had, and then Hlengi, I'm going to ask you what did you get as one of the leading lights in this campaign, and certainly inspired this deep dive series. So Megan, what did you expect from the get-go?
Thanks, Pete. And I'm not sure, being a little older, that I knew what on earth to expect. So I think the wonderful thing has been really an innovative way to take policy to people. I was just thinking earlier today that a couple of weeks ago, Minister Creasy at the Presidential Commission on Climate Change, she really sort of put a call out there to the country saying, what are the policy reforms that we need in order to move more rapidly to achieve climate ambition. This policy really is, one of the very first policy initiatives to try and do exactly that. She sort of said it's going to be a challenge. Transition is complex and it's multi-layered, particularly when you're pushing faster than the sort of usual bureaucratic policy process needs to go. It struck me that the globe has really got into a sort of a bad habit of being either for or against something. We've seen a lot of that sort of binary politics lately. And it feels like we don't have that luxury when it comes to the climate transition or the low carbon transition. And it's time that, people have to be involved. And if you see a challenge, or if you don't think that, a policy is in the right direction, there's not the luxury of being against it. So really, I think this whole podcast has been kind of a call to bring people closer, to take policy to people, to really honestly say to the broader public, what are your ideas? And if there are challenges, how do you see a way through that? And the cities don't have all the answers. We as the sort of technical support don't have all the answers, but we can't have anyone sitting on the sidelines. People really have to get involved. So I think that's the challenge of tonight's discussion, but it's really been the backbone of the entire podcast series. So that's what we hope to get out of it. And we hope in that way to be changing the culture of policy discussion, because I think this kind of ambitious climate transition is going to require a really different way to engage with policy. That said, I would just quickly, while I've got the floor, love to say how wonderful it is to see in the list of people here this evening so many of the partners, and just to stress how much of a partnership process this entire program has been. From C40 side, we even have the program manager from London, Paul, in the discussion tonight. So it's really been a wonderful process. And we look forward to hearing all those voices this evening.
And Hlengi, anything you'd like to add? And as I say, if I was asking Megan what did she expect, what did you get? What was your take at the end of the day when we wrapped that 4th and final episode, talking about the deep dive and the breadth and reach of the program and the possibilities that it represented?
For me, I think when we started this, I wanted to go beyond the stakeholders that were engaged. So we had engaged national government and cities and other government officials, but I wanted to go beyond those stakeholders to ensure that if this is the route that we're taking, and we're saying the rest of South Africa should take, then everyone needs to know about it. So the aim of this was really to get the engaged citizens to listen in, and also I think within the big questions to assist with question number 6 when other municipalities start joining in. To hopefully this platform will help them with some lessons that we have learned, and they can use them further. So I think for me that's what I wish for, and I think that's what I've gotten, particularly seeing the audience that has joined us, because we have so many people from the different sectors that have joined, and I'm hoping there was someone from Kenya as well who was interested in this program, and I'm hoping she's joining us tonight because she also said she was deeply interested. They are planning to implement this in Kenya. So hopefully this will go further than South Africa, but the rest of African countries. And I can actually come up with concrete solutions, African solutions that are suitable to all of us.
Thanks for that reflection. And again, I'm going to say it. Thanks so much for the hard work. All of the episodes, all of the logistics behind the scenes of getting this done could not have happened without your hard work and effort behind the scenes. So thank you. And the fact that we've got almost 50 people on this call right now, testimonial to that effort and commitment. Thank you. Paul Cartwright, you're very welcome here, sir. Welcome all the way from London. I'm going to put you on the spot here and just give you the opportunity to maybe set the scene. I mean, Hlengi and Megan have really given us a good sense of their expectations from a South African perspective. But perhaps you can just indulge us and give us a bit of an idea of what's happening around the world. How does the programs that the cities of Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni, Cape Town and others who have been guests on our podcast series, how does what they do tie into this bigger global effort? And what is it that you've started to see from the efforts here in South Africa that may be starting to either set the pace or assist in the thinking around the world? So welcome, Paul, and I'd really appreciate your thoughts on this, sir.
Thanks, Pete. And nice to see everyone on the call today. Great to see so many participants, and thanks for inviting me to share my thoughts. So yeah, I mean, this program and the achievements that have progressed over the last few years is really quite a big deal. We have a recent announcement from one of the cities in the last few weeks, in the city of Durban eThekwini municipality, that the net zero carbon policy has been approved by council. So this is quite groundbreaking news. It's the first city in South Africa, but more importantly, this is the first city in Africa, and I think that I'm aware of that's had a net zero carbon policy approved. So this is a pretty big deal, and the 4 cities form part of a pioneering group of cities. I mean, we have a commitment at C40 called the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Declaration. There's only 28 cities globally that have signed up to that. So, and if we look at it regionally, this is a sort of step change in South Africa that hopefully will spread to other cities in the region, but also other cities in the world. I mean, currently, if we look at it from looking at, I don't know if this comparison is useful, but we're looking at it from cities in the global south and cities in the global north. The 4 cities in South Africa are only 4 of 5 cities that signed up to this level of commitment. So I think this demonstrates that these achievements can be made, but I think what it also demonstrates, I think, particularly in South Africa, where there's 4 cities sitting within the same country, of the power of sort of collaboration to achieve this step change in policy. And I think that doesn't always happen. I mean, I'm based in London, UK, and we have cities that aren't necessarily collaborating on shared vision, shared goals. And I think this is a really big step, and can demonstrate to other large global countries that this sort of collaboration across policy development can be a sort of a key step forward for on the sort of roadmap to net zero carbon. If I look at that in the context of some of the other C40 cities which sit within countries where there's maybe 2 or 3 other cities, I think this is a great example to that. And I think we'll be using this sort of the examples from South Africa to share with other cities across sort of networks at a technical level, but also looking at the wider network and at the sort of political level as well. And I think hopefully the mayoral leadership platform that C40 provides as an opportunity for the South African leaders to share what they've been doing with other city mayors across the world. And this is particularly pertinent as we now I think it's about 6 months away from the COP26 climate convention in November in Glasgow in the UK. So I think this is now kind of a really opportune moment to, as we build up to that, to demonstrate, these sort of ambitious policies are possible. Having said that, this is only just the start of the journey. I think we all know that the challenges, the policy approval is one thing, but the implementation is still very much potentially the biggest challenge. And I think, as we see from cities that have already got to this stage in their development, I think there are a lot of challenges to overcome in terms of getting that sort of that scalable buy-in across the building sector, but also some of the capacity challenges within municipalities in terms of the processes, from compliance processes to monitoring processes to some of the implementation and training and development challenges as well. But I think the progress that's been made over the last 3 to 4 years, a very strong start, and I think we're confident that it will only sort of build momentum to benefit other cities around the world. So.
Well, Paul, thanks so much for taking time out and being part of this evening and making your contribution. And hopefully from this evening's conversation, you can take the message back to the broader global community that you're working with. So thank you for that. I'm going to next take the opportunity to check in with at least 2 of our municipalities that we engaged with. I'm going to start with Cape Town. Leslie Savanda, welcome, Leslie. You've been part of a couple of conversations that we've had. You've been a driving force within the city around our efforts in terms of the net zero building program there. Just some take-home points from your side. Any thoughts?
Hi, thanks, Pete, and thanks for having me. I think it's been quite a challenging program to be part of, but also very exciting. A lot of things that we've learned along the way. And I think the biggest takeaway from the project that for me was in terms of the importance of having robust data collection. This really kind of helped us on the program to develop a pathway that's actually feasible for Cape Town without having something that would not work for the South African context. So that was quite a big thing that enabled us so that our policy is actually coming from a very strong evidence base. I think also the biggest takeaway that I take with and that I'm still using in my work now is the importance of engaging with different stakeholders and trying to get buy-in from as many stakeholders as possible so early on in the journey. That's actually quite a very important thing. But I think from my experience in my involvement in the program, it's also important to have, a very multi-pronged approach. So with the challenges that we experience on the program, it was quite important that we are able to adapt quickly. We very flexible, but then also resilient, because we're going against the norm and we're trying to fundamentally change how people design and construct buildings. And so you always need to be very agile, be very flexible, so that when you reach or when you stumble or you reach a roadblock, you innovative and come up with different solutions, and having those different opinions from people, constantly learning from people, constantly engaging from various stakeholders is actually what enabled us, I think, to get to where we are. So I think those would be my 3 kind of important lessons that I've learned on this journey.
Again, thank you for sharing that, and thanks for being part of the conversation over the last few weeks, Leslie. Really appreciate that. Hlompo, welcome. Nice to see you again. How's things up in Tshwane today? Everybody well?
Good evening, Pete. Yes, I'm well, thank you. And I hope everybody on the call is doing well this evening. And just some reflections from the city of Tshwane. I think the city of Tshwane is always pioneered towards being a sustainable capital city. And we see this through a number of, flagship projects implemented by the city. So there are a number of certified green buildings within the city, including, the Tshwane House, the headquarters of the city. This is also demonstrated through the fact that the city was the first of all cities in South Africa to put out a green building policy and bylaw in 2012. One of the lessons that we've learned is that there was very little traction, with respect to the 2012 policy and bylaw, due to aspects such as limited awareness raising around the policy and bylaw. And so as a result, we've really invested heavily in engaging stakeholders and ensuring that all stakeholders are heard as part of this current review and update to the 2012 Green Building Policy and Bylaw. And we've also ensured that, we collaborate as broadly as possible. So we are collaborating with the CSIR, with Sustainable Energy Africa, So I think we've placed a strong emphasis on collaboration to strengthen the policy and bylaw, as well as stakeholder engagement to ensure that we have sufficient buy-in to gain the traction that we need to get net zero carbon off the ground within the city. So I really think that it's been a long journey for the city, but I think that we are moving in the right direction. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks to you, Hlompo. Thanks again for that input and those reflections. And I'm now going to try and change it up slightly. Prof. Francois Virley, it's nice to have you on the call. Francois, welcome. You've got maybe a bit of a provocation around, meeting the environmental outcomes, but obviously keeping focused on some of South Africa's realities and the reality check. So please, let's hear your thoughts on this from your side. Welcome.
Look, it's an absolutely fascinating environment that we've entered on, one of the things that will come out of COVID-19 is a focus on ESG, environmental, social, and government. I think if you look daily at the moment in any investor environment, you will see the focus that Shell yesterday had a court case running against it in the Netherlands, saying that Shell was not doing enough in this particular domain. And I think we may find ourselves in an important environment where in the past, much of this was driven by public policy, where suddenly investors are entering the game very critically, more than they've ever been, saying, as pension funds, we will not invest in companies that take a particular stance. And so I think the interesting environment that is developing now is a complementarity almost between what planners and cities have wished to achieve over the past few years and what is happening in the boardroom. And I don't think that we've had that ever. Now, one can argue this is greenwashing taking place. You run one green bond and now you're a green company and you've done what you can. But I think I'm taking a view that it's not good enough anymore to say, well, from a technical perspective, we now have a building that is technically green and hence we've done what we've had to for society. I think we're moving from technicality to function. What function does this property pose to society? What does it offer to society? Do we need that extra building? When Amazon, and I'll be honest, when Amazon says we're building a new building, we have 2.4 million square meters of empty space in this country at the moment. Is there a need for another building? And I suppose those become questions that we're going to be asking. And I suppose my other, if I can say, provocation at the moment in this discussion is that we often talk of ESG. I think in the global south, we need to change it to SGE. Start with the social, then get to our government, and then get to the environment. Now, of course, the argument will be that we should be doing all of those at the same time. But I think we run a risk here that, and I'm not saying that the E bit is the easy bit, but you can get away with E without necessarily addressing the social issues around you. Like I said, I don't want to be flippant about it, but putting a few solar panels. There's big business behind E as well. Let's not underestimate this. There's big business wanting to put in the most efficient building and to use new technologies. There are interest groups behind all of this, and hopefully it leads us to where we want to be. But I think it's going to be that balance, and I think that we're starting to get the metrics in the E bit, but I think that it is time that we will start working on the metrics of the S bit. And meeting the S bit is maybe meeting the National Development Plan, meeting our integrated development plans. And it's that balance that I'm trying to get here. Does one ignore broader policies of this country and meet the environmental outcomes and say, well, we've done our bit? Are we going to get to a green, efficient economy with 40% of our population unemployed? living in 40 kilometers away from their place of work. Anyway, let me leave it at that. But I think that it's that balance that we are going to have to try to find, which I think in the north, maybe the social and governance issues have largely been sorted out, or are probably less problematic, or than what we are facing. Okay, let me leave it at that. Thank you.
Prof, thanks very much for those thoughts and provocation. I'm sure you're going to get a response to that. Maybe Rebecca, I see you put something there in the chat box. Do you maybe want to respond to that straight off the bat?
Hi, yeah, great to be here with everyone. And, I've just been thinking about the idea of just in the process of learning more about impact investors, and really been thinking about actually that municipalities and the public sector more broadly are actually impact investors. And because with every rand or investment we're making, we are looking to derive a broader impact from it, and often at very much a non-profit, potentially even at a loss financially, but for a greater benefit in other areas. And because of what Francois was talking about and the awareness of the financial community and kind of ESG becoming more and more mainstream, municipalities really are well positioned to kind of take hold of that and partner with the financial sector. And to do that, I think, comes into when we think about implementation, is to think about what is the role of the municipality then. It may be, it's many things, but maybe it's really to focus on actually packaging these projects well, identifying, taking ideas and concepts and goals and putting them into projects that can actually attract finance. So we have these great net zero carbon goals, and how do we actually then take the different kind of mechanisms we've identified and then rephrase that into something that can attract finance or is of interest for what a financier does in the world, and to kind of connect those two purposes. And then also, on the other side is to really be focusing on how do we monitor and track our impact. And I think municipalities do this already, so how not to just add more monitoring and evaluation, but also to do it in a lean way, a way that makes sense, and to use digital technology to do so. And how do we embed that now when we're looking at designing the implementation plans for these net zero carbon built environment targets? Yeah, just a potential reframing or repackaging, and something I'm thinking about. It would be interesting to hear what others think about that framing. Thanks, Pete.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca. Just before I come next to Sarah Ward, and Sarah, I'm going to be interested to get your take on having worked within a municipal environment for many years and now spending a couple of years out in the private sector, your take. But before I get there, I just want to reflect on a comment that's been made by Tulani Kuzwayo. Tulani's got some audio issues, so he's saying he's not going to speak just at this stage. But he makes the point that he thinks that net zero carbon buildings will have a limited desired impact if there's no political will. So there's an issue there around, is there the will within the different municipalities? We've heard about eThekwini having signed off on their NZ policy, which is a first, which is fantastic. He also goes on to say, having municipalities lead this process creates impetus and opens an opportunity for industry professionals to be the drivers of this, to turn the ESG complementarity into reality and scale. So important points that Tulani's made, and hopefully, Tulani, you'd be welcome if your audio does improve to come back in on that point and expand further. But Sarah, I'm going to come to you now and say I'm really interested to get your take. You've seen both sides of the fence in recent years, and some observations maybe on the outside looking in and saying these are some either opportunities or things that we should be thinking about within the municipal space.
I think it's a bit of a misnomer to say I'm in the private sector now. It's more that I'm just not inside a municipality, and so I have a different perspective. But most of the work I'm doing is still for social organizations or organizations working with the public sector. But I have gone from, a year and a half ago, I was managing the City of Cape Town's participation in this program, to now very recently writing up the case study for the South Africa Buildings program. And it was a fascinating process, reading up and interviewing people and finding out what had happened, basically since I've been there, since I'd left. And I was really bowled over by the incredible cohesion in the program. which I think is very much, thanks to everyone in the program, but particularly to C and to the C40 and their particular approach, and to how they've managed the complexities in the program from, really, which I think people are touching on, but that this is no simple route of change. This involves politics, it involves the private sector, it involves finances, it involves, people's own personalities and how much, you've got champions and drivers and then people who are putting the brakes on things. But I've been very impressed with how things have progressed and as I said, the kind of unity around it. The one thing that really struck me though is how difficult it is often for municipalities to really surf the impetus that is out there in the private sector, that really there seems to be a very strong impetus in the private sector to build better. For very good financial reasons. And sometimes the municipalities or national government, local government can actually lag behind that and be nervous of being, of leading. So I think it's different from one municipality to another, but I think it's something to really kind of grab hold of and look at how to kind of grab onto those coattails. And then I think the other thing that impressed me was that a lot of this progress has happened during COVID. And COVID has already set such a path of change for us all. So the last part of the case study is this the great reset? Are we going to be able to use this opportunity of that's been presented to us globally for resetting to net zero carbon? And I think there's lots of opportunity there.
Mark, you've made a really interesting, Mark Sherratt, you've made a very interesting comment around the people driving and the people maybe being a bigger part of this picture than the actual policy itself. Do you just want to maybe expand on that?
I think that's been my greatest takeaway from just being part of this is just, I know most of the people in the room here and the quality of the people behind what's driving this is probably for me the most important part. I'm standing on shoulders of people that have been in the industry for over 10 years. And if I look at the quality of that for the next 10 years, the next 20 years, I'm pretty sure we'll attain it. The policy for me, I've got a firm conviction that it's people that drive movements. It's not philosophy. People and other people need that. And I think that's what I'm really just excited about is be around, the people that are in this room and I'm including obviously private and public sector. Yeah. I think we can do it. That's just my motivational speech for the evening.
It's interesting. Francois Burley has responded in the chat box saying that the decision by the Biden administration to rejoin the Paris Accord is as much an important decision. And maybe that's back again to the personality, Mark. It's about those personalities and people driving this and having those decision-making opportunities. Colleagues, I was led to believe we're joined by somebody from one of our professional colleagues up in Kenya. And perhaps you'd like to give us a take from what you've heard today and maybe had a listen through the podcast. Anything you'd like to reflect on?
Greetings from Kenya. I'm happy to join you on the call, and it's a pleasure to be on this podcast to get to learn on what you're doing net zero carbon. My name is Ruth. I'm a member of the Kenya Green Building Society and also a board member serving in the advocacy committee. I'm currently working with the National Construction Authority and we are designing the first net zero carbon building. And we hope that being a government project will be able to set the pace and give visibility to net zero carbon buildings. Particularly what has excited me being on this call is hearing the experiences, the enthusiasm around the subject, as well as the outlook on what the future has. And I believe we have a long way to go in our end, but I'm glad that you have trailblazed and we have important and invaluable lessons to borrow from you for us to drive the similar agenda that we have in our country. Thank you very much for having me on the call, and I look forward to many more similar and even sharing our experience once it's out of the cradle stage. Thank you.
No, thank you, Ruth. And what a pleasure to welcome you into our conversation this evening. Thanks so much for taking the time and for being part of this. It really is very, very exciting to have you with us. I do understand we are also joined by eThekwini. I think we've got Magash, Naidu. Magash, you're very welcome. And maybe you just want to also give us a sense. First of all, congratulations on having signed off your net zero carbon policy last week. Perhaps you just want to give us a sense of the road to getting that approved and what you hope to achieve from there on in as one of the major drivers within the different cities here in South Africa.
I just want to start off by saying what Sarah was indicating earlier, that there's a large number of components or elements that come together to create reality, I completely agree with. And that was one of the central considerations when we were starting to map out the program in eThekwini. And early on, we took the decision to create an ecosystem to support the program and obviously then the objective towards net zero carbon. So what I mean by an ecosystem was we didn't just want to create a policy document that sat on a shelf or a folder these days because we didn't print it, right? So we wanted to put a number of elements together to ensure that the policy was implementable. And that meant obviously a number of internal considerations and then outward facing mechanisms. So, and then also I know political support came up earlier. In eThekwini, the political will and support's been fantastic. We've never been turned away. There's always been collaborative engagement with our political principles. So yeah, it's quite a nice environment to be in at the moment. And then just to go into some of the details on the ecosystem, obviously the first part is the new buildings green policy. That will then be supported by bylaw that's currently in development. But in addition to that, we've heard what business and the private sector is saying, sort of at private sector at large. And our revenue management team, and again, the political principles, we've formulated an incentive policy to support the uptake of green certified buildings as built in eThekwini. And that public consultation process on that policy will start in the next 8 weeks, perhaps. So we're looking forward to engaging on that. And that's essentially, to offset some of the cost of the additional costs that businesses currently face with getting towards net zero carbon. And then we've got a number of training training aspects that we've undertaken already through C40 and SIA, and support's been fantastic. And we've got a lot of interventions coming up, like the establishment of certain training and testing centers for a few of the sector technicians. Sorry, that's my Labrador barking in the back. I think he might want to have some input as well, but I think maybe let me stop there.
No, Magash, fantastic. And again, congrats. Great job your side, and regards to all the team there across on the East Coast, and for being here with us. I'm going to come to Chilo Lombe, who, as I say, helped us understand some of the private sector input. And just to get a reflection from your side, Chilo, just listening to this evening's, the way that the conversation is starting to work towards.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is fantastic to see how many people here, and not just the number, but the wide range of sectors that it comes from. Notwithstanding that a lot of the times what we spoke about was the fact that it's not an easy thing to achieve. In fact, it's very, very challenging. But I think the ambition of the goal sort of matches the order of magnitude of the issue we're trying to solve. But definitely, this type of engagement is probably one of the things that was key missing ingredient in many attempts at sustainability and how we do it. You find that if we have a discussion like this, it would be 40 of us that all do the same job, and now it isn't. Appreciate that input, Chilo. I'm now going to say, Mary, you'd wanted to come in. Mary Hall from the City of Cape Town. You'd wanted to talk about the importance about bringing along the citizens and getting that broad reach to the citizen base and getting them involved. Do you want to maybe elaborate on that, Mary?
Hi, Pete. Thanks so much. I mean, I think we've a lot of the discussion so far has been around policy development, and we touched on the kind of finance aspects, which are all really important. But I think a lot of when you speak to developers and you say, you know, when will you change? What will make you shift? And they say when the customer demands it. And so I think until we can create a demand for net zero carbon or put, you know, we've got to come from both sides. We've got to come from the policy side, but we've also got to come from the customer side to say you need to be demanding these technologies. You need to be demanding these types of buildings. You need to be pushing our designers and developers and builders in this way. And I have a great anecdote. Sorry, Leslie, I'm stealing your anecdote. But Leslie had some renovations done, and through forcing her builder to use low VOC paint, she's changed the type of paint that builder uses from now on. And he comes back and says how great they all feel. And, you know, unless the customer is pushing sector to change, I don't think we're going to see change. And so that's an area that we're really working on in my team at the City of Cape Town, is kind of bringing the customer along. So we've recently launched the Let's Act for a Stronger Cape Town campaign, which is all around climate change mitigation and adaptation and developing resilience, and how, you know, some actions are pretty small, but other actions are big, and the action, and there's sort of a ripple effect of asking for better products, asking for better designs. And so I think that sort of customer pushing for change is really, really important. And I also just want to take this opportunity to invite anyone who's in Cape Town down to Greenpoint Park, because our net zero carbon pop-up home is going live again from Saturday. And there'll be lots of action for the next week, but it will be living there for the next 3 years. And that exhibit has sort of spent some time both in Greenpoint Park and Vangate Mall. And the fantastic response we've had from average Cape Townians walking through that building has just been eye-opening. You know, a middle-aged couple saying, well, I'm going to tell my husband that he needs to do X, Y, Z. And people looking at a range of things. It's not just PV panels on the roof. It's orientation, it's insulation, it's better windows. So I think this sort of range of things that people can incorporate into their own homes, and just getting them thinking that net zero carbon is possible now. It's not this kind of futuristic thing that we're trying to impose on people. It's a choice that we can make right now. So yeah, that's just from our side. Thanks.
Well, thanks for that, Mary. I mean, I think it's important you talk about anecdotes, because I think in our 4th episode, David Gardner, I'm going to come to you. You had a fantastic story that you told. And again, I don't think it's apocryphal. I think it was true. You talked about how, I think it was changing the lighting system or the lighting componentry in one of the countries in Eastern Europe. I think it was, where it was thought to be too expensive, but almost a whole step change over a very short period, where actually the technology ended up becoming cheaper than the original less sustainable materials that were used. Can you maybe just share that again, David? And just in terms of, you know, that is an important part of this equation. Actually, it's this type of change that can almost happen by stealth, but it's happening with or without the policy interventions that we're talking about. Welcome, David.
Yeah, I think it is good to look at what happens too. We forget that we're in a technologically advancing world, a rapidly technologically advancing world. And at the same stage, we also spoke about going back to some human basics of how people have been building with materials for thousands of years. So the melding of those two things creates a great starting framework for how one starts making net zero carbon buildings much more accessible. The example I spoke about was the use of low E glass, and what was seen as quite a draconian standard being put in place in Poland for the use of low E glass. And there was major outcry from industry around the additional costs this would take and how it was going to affect costs of accommodation. And a short couple of years later, 2 or 3 years later, you could only buy low E glass. There was no other glass because of the changes to the standards, and the cost of that, because of the new technology of producing it, had come down to below the original cost of some of the other fenestration factories that were producing it. I think we see this all the time. We see how many people still use normal incandescent bulbs. They're probably out there. You can buy them. I see them in Macro and those places, but many people now recognize that that is not the thing to do. It costs them more money. It costs the environment more. And therefore, we should be looking at other types of materials. So the sense also, this is recognized in, for instance, an edge system, which is constantly moving. It's not a fixed target. We're not moving towards a particular set of savings And then we're going to get there. We will continue to ensure that we're moving towards new standards with new targets, with new technology. And that's the beauty of the system, is that every step that we take becomes more normal in society. And the more normal it becomes, the less it starts costing, and the more value it adds over the entire built environment.
Thanks, David. It's a great story, and I think it's a perfect illustration of the speed and change that can happen, and that's what we should be working towards. Megan, I wanted to pick up on a point that you've made here about how certainly let's call it the blue chip investors are more and more trying to think about, and I mean, Francois alluded to it, whether it's seen as greenwashing, but also there are companies who genuinely want to be living this and working towards it in terms of the offices that they occupy and the message that they espouse. So, do you just want to maybe talk about that, Megan, just in terms of a scene setting? And then again, people may want to respond to that.
In the stakeholder engagement that the City of Johannesburg did, and David Gardner was also part of that, we had some really interesting discussions with developers and financiers, so the banking sector, and each of the parties in the long chain of value in the sort of real estate sector all have slightly different constraints and interests. And Growth spoke to that push for sort of more green portfolios. And I think this links to what Mary Hoare mentioned just now. But, from the banking perspective, there's this need for the value, the sort of green value, to be captured so that they can then pull that through into their financing offers. But while properties or houses that are green don't show a difference in the market, then that value is not captured.
Do you want to pick up on a couple of points? Chilo, just again saying, I'm taking this call from our office. We're 100% on solar and battery, which is great. Sarah Ward reflecting on the LED light bulbs in Cape Town, that the city did a mass retrofit a number of years ago. And the next thing, there were 3 local companies producing LEDs in Cape Town, whereas previously all were imported. So again, these massive step changes and opportunities within what seems at one stage, well, it's too expensive, it can't be done. And in fact, before you know it, it's normal. Francois, you wanted to come in on the raising of green capital, and the thinking on that.
Let me just raise 2 issues here. I think we're already seeing evidence in the markets that you can raise debt at close to 20 basis points lower if you are doing the right thing from an ESG environmental issue. So the financing is starting to play out. But I think there's even a bigger issue here. There is a lot of equity floating around the world trying to find a home in green projects at the moment. So your ability to raise capital, whether it is for housing projects, public sector projects, infrastructure, which have the correct metrics and ratings, opens up a pool of financing that would not have been available 2 or 3 years ago. So I think increasingly it's what's becoming interesting. It's just good business, and everyone's playing that role. The bank is starting to say, a bank will have its green rating that it's going to start playing towards, and its ability to raise capital, multilateral capital across the globe. IFC, we've just seen Eris, a company who's just raised IFC funding on, it had more to do with housing, but it's going to be an interesting balance. Do you do green issues, or if you're a company, do you put solar panels, or do you go and invest in the CB doing inclusionary housing, which is part of the S? Which one do you do? Where do you pick up your points? Where should that be? And it's very tempting to stay with the E, but maybe there's something to say, well, let's, and we're seeing, the point was made, Growth Point announced that it went into housing, but yes, is inclusionary housing, social housing part of the equation? And that balancing act between ESG is going to become an interesting one. Okay, let me leave it at that. Thank you.
Well, again, appreciate that. I'm now going to come to Stephen Davis. Stephen, also from the City of Cape Town. Stephen, welcome. Good to see you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Pete. I think what's behind my question is, having worked with the city for the for the City of Cape Town for the past 3.5 years as C40 City Advisor, just reflecting on how, as we've been developing the Climate Action Plan, which has obviously included the buildings work, but it also includes energy and waste and sort of all the adaptation work and water and sanitation and all a range of different departments, and also the working on the spatial planning side of things. We've just found that, the appetite for these sort of ambitious plans and policies varies, and especially where there's initiatives such as net zero carbon buildings or some of the spatial planning initiatives, which are very transversal. There's, questions around from the city around mandates and how whose responsibility is it to drive this, and, departments have their own sort of lanes that they stick to. And I just was really curious to hear what Magash has to say about how they managed to get such great support across departments and such great enthusiasm and buy-in. What was that naturally there, or was it something that the people developing the policy had to do? What was the mechanism for that, and what can other cities learn from eThekwini's experience?
I think we might have lost Magash. I think we might have lost him there, Stephen. So we'll have to hold that one over. But Tlhompo from Tshwane would like to respond. So let's hear from Tlhompo and their experience. Welcome back, Tlhompo.
I just wanted to share our experience in the city of Tshwane, because we've had great success around rallying internal support for the updated policy and bylaw within the city. And one of the key mechanisms that we utilised to do this was the establishment of a project steering committee, so a governance mechanism that oversees the update to the policy and bylaw. And this constitutes of all the departments that would be affected by the amendments to the policy and bylaw and responsible for supporting the Building Control Office in implementing the policy and bylaw. We ensured that we kind of walk this journey on a day-to-day basis with the Building Control Office as the implementing department, coupled with kind of ongoing engagement outside of the standard city policy or bylaw processes to ensure that we engage a variety of internal stakeholders and ensure that we get their kind of input. And one of the key things that came out of those internal engagements was really the need to ensure that departments understand how the bylaws and policies that we're working on interface with broader city sustainability issues. For example, the way we began to address this was to say, okay, which elements of policy and bylaw interface with the site development planning process, for example, and how can we bring that in, into the bylaw itself. So I think it's really important to ensure that each stakeholder has a good understanding of how they fit into the process and how they fit into implementation of the bylaws and the policies, and how it interfaces with their kind of mandate on a day-to-day basis. I think the CAP was a really useful tool for us as well, in the sense that it positioned the policy and bylaw within kind of the broader city ambition to be kind of net zero carbon and climate resilient by 2050. So it was a really useful tool in demonstrating, how the importance of the policy and bylaws that we're putting together. So I think that positioning is really important. Thanks.
No, thank you again, Tlhompo. Thanks for coming in and giving us that perspective. Just in terms of, I'm absolutely delighted to say that Marley Swart, who works in the transport sector, so in the transport department rather of the City of Cape Town. Marley, welcome. You've talked a bit about, in the chat box here, about the idea of green travel plans as a requirement. Maybe you want to come in and just explain what you're thinking on there, and I'd be really interested to get other people's take on this idea coming from your sort of transportation sector perspective. So Marley, welcome.
Yeah, the green travel plans is not a new idea. Cities overseas do have those, and it usually is part of getting a building approved, so new buildings approved. Then it goes together with a transport assessment. Well, I mean, there's still a different transport impact assessment, but then the green travel plan is something extra, which is more, I looked at an example just before I joined this meeting, and what is very interesting about the green travel plan, their whole focus is different. They basically start with how do people get there in public transport, and then they move to, how do you walk or you cycle there. So the focus already is different. And then there's also as part of the developer, they sort of put promises they will provide subsidies for travel on public transport, or they would give their colleagues, extra money to buy bikes to get to their place of work. So it's very much focused on that developer also to think about ideas what they can do to make the transport to the buildings more sustainable. I know with the Green Star buildings, there's also been sort of requirements, but I think we need maybe something that's a bit more substantial to get people to start thinking in a different way. In transport itself, we're trying to get the idea going, but obviously it will always help if it can come from other sort of departments as well to push this idea and to see how it can connect to the net carbon zero buildings going forward. And then I just wanted to add one more thing. I've attended C40 training last week, Wednesday, and we specifically talk about carbon footprint and also the carbon net zero buildings. And it's really, really been so helpful for me. And I was just wondering, when we're talking about training, I'm not sure if our politicians and all of them had the training or such training already, and it could be something to sort of do if they haven't received it yet. I found it very interesting and helpful for me to understand it all better. Thanks.
No, thank you, Marley. Anybody want to respond to that, the sort of transport provocation and thoughts there? Again, just out of interest, Marley, where have you seen this sort of thing work? Where has it been used? Just to get a sense of that. You said it's used elsewhere.
It's used in the UK, and the plan I was looking at was Australian plan. So it looked like a bigger development, like for instance, something like our Harbour's Arch would then do a green travel plan. So you might not have to do it for every single development, but definitely your larger developments that could create a lot of car traffic.
Kedibone, you wanted to come in on how City of Tshwane is trying to include non-motorised transport into that policy and the bylaw space, which would be very, very helpful to unpack, particularly on the back of what Marley's talked about there. So Kedibone, welcome. Also one of our previous guests on the podcast series. So welcome back, Kedibone. How are you keeping? Are you good?
Hi, Pete. I'm very well. Thank you very much for the conversations today. I think they are very interesting and very fruitful. So thank you for all those that have joined us today. I think what I wanted to just highlight in terms of what has been brought by Amali in terms of in terms of the inclusion of transportation to green buildings or net zero buildings. So what we're trying to do as City of Tshwane with our policy and bylaw is to also not leave out the elements of non-motorized transport around the developments that will be approved in terms of net zero carbon. So we are essentially encouraging that those developments should include your non-motorized infrastructure, like your bicycle lanes and your public transport routes, and also some of those big buildings or developments should include, infrastructure such as your charging stations, EV charging stations, and some of the bicycle racks, where also people, when they ride to a building or to the office, they can actually have shower and then go into the office. So that's kind of like some of the elements that we're trying to encourage for new developments as they come in, so that we're trying to be more integrative in terms of what we want to achieve with net zero. And if I may add again, we also are including a sustainable waste management within buildings, and how to then also reuse some of the material within buildings, and how to deal with construction waste, because it has been quite a challenge in the City of Tshwane. And we are also including adaptation elements and resilience around the Tshwane development, because we have seen how much of the heat urban island we have in City of Tshwane. So we need to address those elements. So I just thought maybe I should add to what Mali was saying, to say that's how we're looking at our NMT in terms of transport. And of course, the city is also finalizing the non-motorized transport guidelines. So that will also fit into the bylaw in terms of how then that should fit into the net zero carbon buildings. Thanks, Pete.
No, thank you, Kedibone. It was nice to hear you back on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Mark. Mark, you've had a comment here in the chat box. And it comes back to one of the things we talked about a bit earlier about political will, but you've got a slightly different frame on it, which is around how cross-party does this issue go? Maybe you want to frame that. And I think any of our colleagues from either Tshwane or from Cape Town who are on the call may want to take a run at it. But let's hear from you first up, Mark, about what your thoughts are and what your question is, and then let's see how we can get a response on that.
I think it's continuing the conversation around kind of sustainable public transport. I know in the city of Joburg, there was kind of a big campaign around bicycle lanes, and a certain political party refused to support that. So I just wanted to know from the cities, how difficult is it to push these kind of policies through? Because I've seen it be derailed until kind of the next election. So yeah, it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts.
The challenges that we have seen is in terms of internal capacity to be able to implement those infrastructure type of projects for transport like NMT. We are currently trying to, or the Roads and Transport Department are trying to actually build capacity within the department, because there hasn't been any dedicated NMT, for example, division that will deal with specific issues around NMT. So that team is currently being put together. But in terms of politics, yes, of course, when the new administration comes in, what we do from city sustainability as the advocates of climate change and sustainability, we would then go around with, for example, to new MMCs that will come in and just present what is it that the city is projecting in terms of climate change targets and goals. And with that, you're able to get the support because you engage earlier. You're able to show them what is it that has been planned, and in terms of continuity, which is important, we are able to get the support that we need. Obviously, there would be those challenges here and there, but it's about advocating and making sure that the political leaders are able to see what is it that the city needs to achieve.
Kedibone, thanks again. That helps a lot. And maybe Mary, you just would like to give us sort of a Cape Town perspective, quick overview.
Pete, I think it's just coming back to one of the same points that was brought up right in the beginning, is that all of this work is about the people who make the work. So we're sitting in these institutions that, seemingly are these non-people institutions, but actually it's about the people who are in them. And I think we see this at all levels of the city. So something that might be a pet project of a mayor, when that mayor leaves, that pet project is sort of forgotten or sidelined for a new pet project or a new focus from a new administration or a new mayor. So it's not necessarily like one party versus another. It could just be that particular person that happens to be in that role at that time. And I think we see it at all levels. One interesting thing that we have noticed is less of sort of someone trying to derail work from a party perspective, but sometimes we get accused by another party of not pushing hard enough, or not, the goals not being ambitious enough. And so we have to, we spend a lot of time trying to respond to comments like that when actually it would just be great if we could focus on our work and get it done. Whereas we have to take the time to actually respond to some of those comments about why we've chosen to focus on this and not that. So that definitely does happen and takes up time.
I think this is the crux of it, is that I get a sense that in the same way that part of our conversation over the 4 episodes, and even in this discussion, has been that the winds are changing. The winds are changing irrespective of which political party is leading, whether it's in the municipal space, in the provincial, or in the national. I get a sense that these things are becoming the imperatives, and the climate change agreements we've signed up to as a country, those cities commitments, things like the C40s, etc., are all pointing in the right direction, that these do go cross-party. Projects may change, The flavour of that project may change, but their commitment, I think, certainly seems to be on a one-way track. So I'm going to start to bring this to a wrap. And again, with a really, from my side, a huge vote of thanks and appreciation to the Sustainable Energy Africa team. And that goes beyond just the SEA, Hlengiwe and Megan Houston Brown there in Cape Town. But also, again, Paul, to you up there in London for joining us this evening. That's a great effort. It's been fantastic to have Ruth join us from Nairobi. What an absolute pleasure and thrill to have two international guests on the call. And to all of you who've taken part, either in the episodes previously, to great sadness, a couple of our colleagues couldn't join, either because they were still waiting to present their council report because the council meeting had overrun, or they were having technical issues. So unfortunately, nothing from Johannesburg this evening. That was purely because of the challenge from that side. And to all of you for taking the time to be with us this evening and for making this a very special event. We've had no less than 30 people. In fact, it's 30 people now. We were as many as 48 or so at the peak. And I think it's a real testimonial to the interest in the topic and the importance of the topic. So watch this space. I have no doubt that this is not the end of the conversation. I've said to Megan, I've said to Hlengiwe, it's the end of the podcast series for the moment, but we will come back to it in due course. In whether it's 6 months or a year's time, and ask some hard questions to all of us. You know, we've had a good run of it around saying these are important aspects and elements, but really the question is, are we going to be able to deliver? And watch this space. And I'm saying to all of you, stay warm, stay safe, and thank you so much. All the very best to all of you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Pete. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Talking Transformation podcast. Please engage with us and let us know your thoughts on this episode. You can do so via the Anchor podcast platform. There's a voice message function available via the app. You can also follow us on Twitter via Talking Transfo and the number 1. So Talking Transfo 1. Our theme music is kindly made available by Tribal Need. Find out about the music, the street art shows here in Cape Town and Europe via tribalneed.com.